apologies to my subscribers because, yeah, this is the first video I've put up in the last 2 months. But the reason for that is because I've been so busy producing this professional grade image sharpening for archive, print and web. And it's now available for download. It's 58 videos. It lasts for over 11 hours. And yeah, quite a mammoth thought, that, listening to me droning on for 11 hours. But it's all about the nuances of sharpening for archive, print and web. There's a list of all the lessons that we've done. Wowzers. Yeah, that's a lot of video. And there's an awful lot in there that you will never have heard of as a sharpening method, and it's all about getting major control and finite control over your archival image sharpening quality. And I'm not joking, if you click this button here to go to checkout, there it is, $59.99. If you fill in your email address, your first name and your last name, and you click that purchase button, clicking that purchase button is possibly the most important thing you will do in 2018. But anyway, that's enough of me wobbling on. We are here to look at Raw Therapy, to be quite honest with you. And the reason I'm wanting to do this quick video on Raw Therapy is that on that training title that I've just shown you, that you really do need to go and buy, even though you might be wondering how I can talk for 11 hours about sharpening. Well, that's because I know more than you do. Sorry to say, and I know it sounds big-headed, but it's true. But the reason I'm doing this, as I said, is simply because I do use Raw Therapy in that training title, and it's a program a lot of people have never heard of, and it is vastly superior to Lightroom. And I'll just show you a very, very quick difference between Lightroom and Raw Therapy. Here I've got this picture of this red squirrel that I've done a rough process on, but if you want to see what it looked like before, that is what Lightroom does to the file on import, and it looks vile. So basically we've got an awful lot of work to do to get that image into a workable state, or a workable or an acceptably workable position, in order to carry on processing it and making it look rather nice. If we head over to the Raw Therapy website and go to the downloads page, we can see we've got the very latest version of Raw Therapy, RT 5.4, for Mac and Windows. Now, this only came out at the back end of last week, and in the actual training title that I've just been showing you, I actually use the slightly older version, Raw Therapy 5.3, because the updated version wasn't out when I recorded the videos. Yeah, very simple. So if you've bought the actual training title, I suggest you download Raw Therapy 5.3, or indeed you could go and download 5.4. There's just one or two little subtle differences in what you'll see in my videos and what you'll actually see inside the Raw Therapy software, or the Raw Therapy GUI. But either way, if you've downloaded it and you've installed it, if I now switch back to Lightroom, and I suppose we can say that this is a quick introduction to Raw Therapy for Lightroom users. And this is the way I use Raw Therapy. When I get an image which is a little bit awkward for me to process in Lightroom, I can just go right click, show in Finder. And here is the raw file, it's highlighted in my Finder. If I now go right click, open with, and choose Raw Therapy, I can choose either the older or the newer version. We'll go for the newer version, RT 5.4. And as you can see straight away, there is a huge difference between the image quality in Lightroom and the image quality in Raw Therapy. Now, I don't want to get into too many technical details about Raw Therapy and Lightroom, save to say that the conversion of the raw file is controlled by what you might call the processing engine. And the processing engine, the main processing engine in Lightroom, is 16-bit. Now, that 16-bit has got nothing to do with a 16-bit image. All it means is that the processing engine is converting the data in the raw file to an accuracy of 16 bits. Whereas if we go over to Raw Therapee, the processing engine inside Raw Therapee actually converts the RAW file to an accuracy of 32 bits. A lot of people really get confused about bits and bit depth, and we'll actually go through it in another video somewhere a little further down the track. We're not going to go anywhere near it in this. Safe to say that the conversion of your RAW file inside Raw Therapee is a lot more accurate than the conversion of your RAW file inside Lightroom. Now, the main thrust of this video is to get people up and running with Raw Therapee. And I've just shown you a simple, basic way in which you can begin to utilise the power of Raw Therapee in conjunction with using Lightroom as basically a file browser. But what we need to do is we actually need to get this image, once we've finished processing it, we need to get it into Photoshop. Or at least we need to rasterize it out into a 16-bit TIFF so that we can re-import it back into Lightroom. So a very quick way of getting Raw Therapee set up is to come to this little icon here, which looks like the sliders on a graphic equalizer, and we click it and we come to our Raw Therapee preferences. And really and truly, this is the most important place you need to be. Now, I'm on a Mac, and my external editor, if you like, for all my images is Photoshop. Now, if you're on a Windows machine, if you come down to this external editor, I don't think any of you will be using GIMP. GIMP's a little bit of a monolith. It's a lot better than people give it credit for. But I still maintain that the best raster image processor is Photoshop. It is actually the complete king of raster image processing. So for a Windows user, I quite frequently see, bear in mind I don't own a Windows machine, but I know for a fact that most people have success by just putting a check in that radio button there in external editor where it says Photoshop installation directory, and they manage to get Raw Therapee to talk to their installation of Photoshop quite successfully. However, if you're on a Mac, that may not work. It doesn't work on any of the Mac machines that I've got in this house, and I've got 3 of them. What we have to do is come down to custom command line, and we have to enter this value here, which is open space -b space quote com.adobe.photoshop with a capital P end quote. And this is basically a normal command line for opening maybe inside Terminal on a Mac, but we need to put the B switch in there because the application is inside a bundle. So we need to activate the bundle switch. Most command lines for applications on Mac would use the A switch for application. So most of them would read open -A. But for Photoshop, because it's a bundle, you have to go for the bundle switch. So it's open space -b space start quote com.adobe.photoshop with a capital P end quote. And that's just about as much as you really need to know to get Raw Therapee to talk to Photoshop. So once we've got our preferences set up, we can go ahead and do a little bit of processing, but the first thing we need to do is to come to the Colour tab and come all the way down to the bottom of the Colour tab. And you can see we're working inside the ProPhoto RGB colour space, but the output profile is RT for Raw Therapee, sRGB. That's Raw Therapee's default output profile. We don't want that. We want to go to RT large G sRGB. RT large basically means ProPhoto, but G stands for gamma and sRGB means the sRGB tone curve. So if we have a colour space that plots ProPhoto RGB colour numbers against an sRGB gamma or tone curve, we're actually using Melissa RGB, which just happens to be the front GUI colour space for Lightroom. Yeah, but we'll stick with the RT. So we're going to go to RT Large, GSRGB, that's okay. And now we can simply come and go over to the details. Well, we won't, we'll go to the raw first. And yes, we've already got chromatic aberration auto correction turned on. We'll come to the exposure panel. Now, there's an interesting thing here in version 5.4 of Raw Therapy, where we've got this auto match tone curve. And what this does, if we click it, which we'll do in a minute, inside every raw file is an embedded Jpeg. And that's the Jpeg that's made by the camera and thrown onto the screen on the back of the camera so you can chimp your images to your heart's content. That Jpeg is actually embedded in the raw file. So if we click this auto match tone curve, that looks quite similar to how the image looked on the back of the camera when I actually shot it, because I was trying to expose as far to the right as I possibly could when I took this without blowing these little highlights here. Basically, it's quite an interesting little feature that they've put inside the latest version of Raw Therapy. And it just goes to show the difference between your camera's meter, because this was shot in matrix metering. We expose to the right as far as we dare, which is always good practice when you're exposing raw files. But it just goes to show the disparity between what the camera actually shows you, the internal processing of the camera, and the contents of the actual raw file itself, which you can see is quite noticeably darker. So we can actually go and put maybe a little bit more exposure compensation in there just to brighten him up just a little tiny tad, and he's looking not three bad. We'll take him up to a 1:1 view and have a look at him for sharpness and consider the noise in the background. So we'll come over to the details panel. We've already got noise reduction applied. This is another place where there's a difference between version 5.3 and version 5.4 of Raw Therapy. In 5.3, this would read as standard and high. In 5.4, it now reads as conservative or aggressive. And I do get the feeling that the aggressive is just a little bit more aggressive than high was in 5.3. But anyway, we'll leave it at conservative. We've just got a little luminance noise correction in there of 1.64, and it's not looking too bad at all. We've got some sharpening on. I'll actually deactivate the sharpening so you can see what we've done, and we'll just ease him down to there so we can see a little bit of the background as well. And I mean, ostensibly the image looks sharp enough as it is, considering it is an unsharpened raw file. As I said, it's taken on a Nikon, it's taken on a Nikon D4 with a 500mm f4 prime. We are going for sharpening method of unsharp mask, and by default the actual threshold control would look like that inside Raw Therapy when we first brought the image in, and I can actually grab this shadow slider point here and I can move it to the right so that I'm actually not applying any sharpening in these darker tonal regions. So as you can see, the bottom left reading there is 167. So between 0 and 167, I'm not applying any sharpening at all. Bear in mind that this is Raw Therapy's 32-bit luminance slider values, so it basically runs from 0 to 2000. So in other words, it's sort of the bottom 5-6%. I might actually take that up till it reads about 200, which it should do around about there. I don't want to apply any sharpening in my brightness highlights, and what I can now do is hold down the shift key and I can change the fade in ramp of sharpening, building from these lighter shadows and very darker midtones up into me lower midtones, keep it at 100% throughout the midtone area, and then gradually fade it out towards the highlights. And the very, very brightest highlights are getting no sharpening at all. I've got the halo control activated at its default setting of 75. And all in all, as a basic illustration of how to process in Raw Therapy and how to get going with Raw Therapy, I think that'll just about do. We'll just come down to the bottom left of the screen, and we've got this little icon here that looks like an artist's palette and a paintbrush, and if we just click that, and that will now export this image as a 16-bit TIFF in the Melissa RGB colour space, or if you like the RT Large Gamma S RGB colour space. I'll just go and convert the document's colours to the working space because there's very, very little difference, and there's certainly no visual difference between Melissa RGB and ProPhoto RGB. So we'll go ahead and click OK, and there's our image inside of Photoshop. We could now go and straight away save that and take that back into Lightroom to do a few little Lightroom tweaks on it, because it is a 16-bit TIFF in the ProPhoto RGB colour space. Or we can go ahead and process and finesse the image inside of Photoshop with a little bit of differential sharpening, which is what my training title is all about. If you want to know what's going on with sharpening, then come over to my digital download store and get that checkout button clicked. Yes, go on. You know you want to. Go on, get it bought. Get it bought. You owe it to your images to produce maximum sharpness without any artifacting. Yes, you do. But anyway, there we go. Back over to Photoshop with our Raw Therapy processed image. And I hope that's just been a help to people, just to show them how to get started and set up Raw Therapy so that it will talk to Photoshop. Okay? So I shall see you again quite shortly, okay? And apologies to my subscribers for being away for a couple of months, but at least now you know why. Okay, cheers, see you later.